Welcome to Channels Business Global with me, Juliana Olayinka from our studios here in London. Over the next half an hour, we'll be looking beyond the business headlines by giving you in-depth perspective on the stories that are affecting all of us. Coming up on today's show, Bill Gates has weighed in on Elon Musk's $44 billion takeover of Twitter by suggesting his acquisition could make the battle for free speech worse than it already is. The director of the European Policy Information Centre, Adam Bartha, will be joining me in the studio for his assessment on social media regulation. And the UK's Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office has published a new report identifying Nigeria as the forefront of economic change in Africa. David Smith, the chairman of the British African Business Alliance, contributed to the research, and he joins me in the studio for some insights on the UK government's plans to deepen their relationship with the country. Then later, I'll be looking back at some of the biggest business stories of the week. But first, let's have a look at the topic that's dominated headlines here in the UK as we await the full outcome of this week's local elections that have taken place across most of the four nations. The exceptional oil and gas trading reported in the first quarter of this year by oil titans BP and Shell has renewed calls in the UK for a windfall tax to fund help for consumers who are facing record high energy bills and soaring inflation. Chancellor Rishi Sunak has so far resisted pressure to make firms pay more tax, and the government has instead insisted that these companies invest their profits back into the UK.
In the MPC's central projection, CPI inflation is expected to rise over the remainder of the year, averaging slightly over 10% at its peak in 2022 Q4. The majority of that further increase reflects higher household energy prices. The price cap mechanism means that it takes some time for changes in wholesale gas and electricity prices to be reflected in retail energy prices. That means consumer price inflation is likely to peak later in the UK than in many other economies, and may therefore fall back later. It is a measure of the scale of the shock that total real household disposable income is projected to fall by 1.75% in this 2022, which, apart from 2011, would be the largest contraction since comparable records began in 1964.
Earlier, I spoke with our business correspondent Simon Pusey for some analysis. Simon, the trading updates we got from BP and Shell were described as exceptional. And on the flip side of that, we are going through the worst cost of living crisis on record. How can the government justify not applying a windfall tax?
Yeah, the contrast is stark, isn't it? The record profits for these huge companies. Meanwhile, a lot of people worried about the rising cost of fuel and food. And there's lots of different reasons for that, but ultimately millions of people are paying over 50% more for their gas and their electricity. And this is at a time when national insurance has gone up by 10%, when the council tax is rising by 3.5%, inflation is outpacing,
3-decade high.
Yeah, exactly, wage growth. And it means that, Britons are facing their steepest real terms drop in income for the past 50 years. And we've got local elections at the moment, and it's going to be really interesting to see just how furious people are with this. And then, as you say, at the same time, you've got BP and Shell with these huge profits. The Labour and the Lib Dems are saying that there needs to be this windfall tax. It's not fair that, people are raking in these huge amounts and ordinary people are suffering. The Conservatives say that for these companies to stay in the UK to invest in green energy, which is obviously really big on that with net zero coming up, that they can't put these taxes on, these windfall taxes, because they'll move to other countries. Now, who knows whether that's actually the case, but that's what the government is saying, so they're sticking to their guns in terms of they're not going to tax them. And there's also other things, of course, that it's not just energy companies' faults. There's things like the war in Ukraine, which is driving the price of oil up. COVID-19 pandemic, obviously, everyone struggled with that. And then we've got the economy after Brexit and trading conditions after Brexit. So there's a sort of perfect storm going on. It's not just these companies.
In China too.
Yeah, of course, yeah. So there's a lot of, and the whole sort of trading issues around that. But I think it is quite hard for the government to stay resolute with this when they're not really helping in any other ways. National insurance wasn't supposed to go up. That wasn't a Conservative manifesto, but it has. So people could point the finger and say, not only are you not helping us in terms of any windfall taxes on these companies, but you're also taxing us more. This isn't fair. You're taxing ordinary people more, and you're not taxing the big companies that are raking in huge profits. But like I said, there's local elections on at the moment, and it'll be a real good bellwether as to how people feel if the Conservatives lose lots lots of seats in the local elections. A lot of councillors are saying, don't look at the Westminster government, don't judge us by them. They're saying, judge us on our local issues, but actually people often...
They're local issues, aren't they?
Exactly, it's a big local issue. If you're not getting enough money and your rent's going up and your bills are going through the roof, then
By
some
value.
people will. So it'll be interesting to see next week what the outcome of those local elections are, and maybe if the Conservatives do lose a load of seats, they might change their minds. They may take a different tax. They may try and help people a bit more, and maybe they will go after those companies and maybe put some taxes on them.
Absolutely. We know Boris Johnson isn't afraid of a U-turn. We'll just have to wait and see those famous words. Thank you, Simon. The UK's Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office has recently published plans to ensure it maintains its position of influence with Nigeria in the wake of an ever-evolving new world order. Significant opportunities in the science and technology sectors, as well as in climate adaptation and mitigation infrastructure, were all discussed in the lead-up to last week's UK-Nigeria Economic Development Forum. David Smith, the chairman of the British African Business Alliance, was a member of the delegation, and earlier I caught up with him for more on this topic. David Smith, it's always a pleasure to have you on Channels Business Global, though it's been a while since I've had you in the studio, so thank you for taking out your time today. You were pretty busy last week. I saw you at a series of events as part of the delegation that arrived from Nigeria to the UK. What were your takeaways from some of those discussions?
Oh, it was absolutely fascinating. It was a delegation of about 30 people, with the Minister for Trade and Investment, Industry, Trade and Investment, and the Minister for Finance and Budget. And they were looking at the role Nigeria plays with the UK and also reaching out to UK business and to international investors for engagement in commercial activity in Nigeria. So it was fascinating at a number of levels. Direct takeaways, we were able to put together a number of very interesting introductions. A major infrastructure project is sitting on my desk, waiting for the brief. That means that we can then instruct some Nigerian consultants to start working on it. And then another deal is incubating, I think is the best way, but sitting around $90 million.
Oh, fantastic.
So I was quite pleased with last week. I mean, it was very tiring. But
I'm sure you were pleased. It was very tiring. I'm happy you said that, because I was tired come Friday evening. I've got to say, a lot of these discussions between Nigeria and Britain are rather opaque in terms of the real meat.
yes.
It can be quite difficult to ascertain, who exactly is involved. Do you find, or have you found, that over the years things are becoming more transparent? I know on Monday, for example, the British government, last week Monday, the Office for National Statistics finally released some decent data on volumes of trade between Nigeria and the UK. Are you finding that they are being a little bit more receptive to being more open to business leaders like yourself and others?
I think it's a two-way street. When you're talking about real business, and then you're talking about even a large migrant population of Nigerians in the UK, that doesn't necessarily fit with a UK impression of big business. But I have to say, our largest project came from a man who runs a security company in Oxford. And you wouldn't expect it to come from there. So this power of the diaspora that I talk about from time to time is really about the connections and capabilities of the diaspora, rather than we know we're talking to Mr. Big Company in Lagos or in Abuja or in Port Harcourt or Kano or wherever. So those things will continue to be opaque. But one of the reasons is that I won't talk to you about my business and you won't talk to me about your business, because we're being protective. And it's a natural Nigerian trait to be reserved and conservative with a very small c in terms of how you project what you do.
Yes.
Once you have the track record and what have you, there is the opulence and the establishment of a reputation. But while you're striving, you keep it very, very quiet. So it makes it very difficult for everyone. Absolutely. I mean, even me saying a 90 million deal in
Thanks
incubation.
thanks for telling me about that,
yeah,
David.
Absolutely. Where's my cut?
Well, we definitely want an exclusive of how that pans out on Channel's Business Global.
But actually, it involved introducing two Nigerians who'd never met before and establishing the chemistry that allows a business discussion to go forward.
Yeah.
Happily, we concluded that.
Wonderful.
So, you know, more news next time.
More news. More news next time. It's interesting you talk about the power of the diaspora, and it's your knowledge of the power of the diaspora via the British African Business Alliance that's allowed you to be published within a report compiled by the House of Commons Foreign Affairs Committee, which is a report on Lagos. Something I'm sure a lot of Nigerian business leaders won't be aware of. Can you tell us what it was all about and how you contributed to that?
Right. Well, I mean, I suppose it's a facet of the democracy that we have here, that there are committees working on multiple different topics and subjects. The Foreign Affairs Select Committee is looking particularly at the long-term relationships that need to be established and fostered and developed.
Post-Brexit.
Post-Brexit, post-COVID, actually post whatever the last plan was. And I think that what I see coming out of this report is a flowering of understanding. And, you know, I've been into Whitehall, I've been into discussions at the FCO, I've been into discussions with DIT and before that UKTI, and they didn't have a place for the diaspora in previous regimes. It was a domestic audience, whereas actually we see it as an international audience and an export audience. I mean, I don't know many people who will pay 20% VAT on an order in the UK when they could save that 20% and buy it from an account in Nigeria. So, you know, the whole thinking of that historically has been wrong. But now they consulted very widely. They talked to a large number of organisations, people, individuals, UK companies, government departments on both sides to get a feel for where Nigeria is now and what the priorities are. So I would say it's definitely a flowering, an opening up, and a clear understanding that there is a huge role for the diaspora to play. One small point in their first paragraph is that there are 200,000 Nigerians in the UK.
Who gave them that number?
Well, I don't know. I think they must have got it from a government department somewhere. But
Times 10.
yes, definitely. Between 2 million and 2.5 million Nigerians in the UK.
Small
and while
C for Conservative.
Some of them will be naturalised British, but actually, when you're looking at interaction, there are many family and business relationships that transcend that,
Yes.
and therefore are very, very important.
We're running out of time, David. You see how time flies when,
It does. We keep talking.
when we're not virtual. But before you go, I do want to talk about the headline figure. The headline figure last week was £3.2 billion pound relationship between the UK and Nigeria is to be boosted. And you look a little bit closely at the figures, that's just 0.3% of UK GDP. Very briefly, if you can, what more can the UK do and Nigeria to encourage more trade between both nations?
Let me tell you about a man who went to Djibouti. It may not seem relevant, but he took 2 pieces of equipment from Birmingham, and he's now turning over $300,000 in Djibouti, making construction materials. Now, I think we have to look at the need for SME development in Nigeria and in Africa broadly, because what the report also underpins is the wider African conversation, and they very much see Nigeria as leaders.
David Smith, Chairman of the British African Business Alliance. Always a pleasure feasting upon your knowledge.
Thank you, Juliana.
Thank you, David.
It's great to be here.
Thank you. In a moment, I'll be joined by the Director of the European Policy Information Centre, Adam Bartha. But before then, here's some business news for you. TikTok is launching an ad program called TikTok Pulse, which will allow marketers the opportunity to purchase ad spots next to top videos across 12 categories, including beauty and fashion, cooking and gaming. Creators with at least 100,000 followers on the social media platform will be able to participate and receive a cut of the revenue. The feature would be the first for TikTok, and the short video format app has been criticised in the past for not providing a way for creators to effectively monetize their popular content. Last year, TikTok generated an estimated $4.6 billion in revenue. Boohoo shares plunged in London earlier this week after the fast fashion retailer warned investors of a slowdown in revenue growth. Pre-tax profits for the 12 months to the end of February fell sharply to £7.8 million from £124.7 million a year earlier. The rising cost of deliveries, an increase in customer returns, along with lower than anticipated growth, has contributed to the significant slump. Despite the gloomy update, sales remain well above pre-pandemic levels, up 14% during the period to £2 billion. The Reserve Bank of Australia has raised its benchmark interest rate for the first time in more than a decade, lifting it to 0.35 from 0.1%. The RBA signalled further increases are likely as it seeks to bring long-term inflation, currently at 5.1%, back towards its 2% target. Australian businesses are having a tough time riding out the impact of elevated inflation, with data showing that consumers are holding back at the checkout. Now to our final topic. Microsoft co-founder Bill Gates has this week weighed in on Elon Musk's $44 billion deal to acquire Twitter. During the Wall Street Journal CEO Council Summit, Gates stated that he has reservations about Musk's motivations, stating that under his leadership, the spread of misinformation on the platform could be made worse. The billionaire Tesla owner has been vocal about the changes he wants to introduce on the popular platform, which includes a major crackdown of fake automated accounts known as bots. The monumental takeover has reignited discussions about social media regulation and freedom of speech. Earlier, I was joined in the studio by the Director of European Policy Information Centre, Adam Bartha. Adam Bartha, thank you so much for joining me on Channel's Business Global today. Now, a couple of months ago, you wrote a short piece titled The Battle of Free Societies. What role do you think social media plays in this battle?
Social media is incredibly important for any think tank. We are a free market, classical liberal think tank, so free speech is important to us. And the piece that you have mentioned is actually an open letter by over 30 free market leaders from all across the continent, basically written in the early days of the Ukrainian-Russian war and calling for more government and social action to help our Ukrainian friends. And I think that's an important example to prove why social media matters and why the information war matters. As you might know, Russia is very strong when it comes to disinformation campaigns. In the early days of the war, everyone was afraid that Russia is going to be winning this information battle. But I think free speech matters because the Ukrainian case proves that it's possible to counter disinformation through more information. Ukraine is putting out a lot of information through memes, through social media campaigns, basically highlighting how Russia is trying to push its disinformation message. So we called for more action and more campaign to help our Ukrainian friends in the battle of ideas and in the battle against Russia.
Yes, of course. Setting aside this awful war that's still going on, we've got to talk about Elon Musk. We have to. And in fact, just recently, I'm not sure if you saw it, but Bill Gates, Microsoft co-founder, he's skeptical about this $44 billion takeover. And he was saying at a Wall Street Journal event that he suspects that Elon Musk may make the battle of free speech worse. We know that he is against deplatforming individuals like Donald Trump, potentially, Russian accounts that could be putting out disinformation. What is your whole perspective on this takeover?
On this occasion, I happen to disagree with Bill Gates. I think he's a fantastic tech innovator. But on this front, I agree with Elon Musk. I think free speech is incredibly important. And for any open and tolerant society, more speech and more debate, whether online or offline, that should be a positive thing. I'm a bit more skeptical when it comes to people saying that Elon Musk taking over Twitter is going to lead to a free speech mecca. I don't think that these companies operate in a vacuum. I think they're very much influenced by government regulation. They're influenced by societal pressure.
Are they?
So even if Elon Musk is really pro free speech and he wants to reform Twitter in a way that would allow basically any type of content as long as it's legal, I think it's going to be constrained by European Union regulation and by regulations here in the UK. So the free speech mecca, even after the takeover, I think it's unlikely to come.
Yeah, he wants to be an absolutionist, doesn't he? We're not sure if that's going to take place. Interesting you spoke about the European Union. Some have called their laws draconian. This Digital Markets Act, I know that the European Policy Information Centre has discussed that extensively on your website. Do you think it's too little, too late to try and, regulate and make competition more easier for smaller guys? Shouldn't this have happened years ago?
I don't think it's too little, too late. I think it's actually too much, too early. I think it's a social mentality nowadays that we're trying to solve all sorts of social problems through government regulations. And sometimes there is an appropriate time and place for these regulations, but especially with tech innovation, it has been a sector that has been booming in the last decade or so. I think the European Union, through its Digital Markets Act and the Digital Services Act, it's trying to solve a problem that doesn't necessarily exist. So the aim of both of these legislative pieces is basically to foster innovation in the tech sector and to create a safer space for consumers. And I would like to address the latter part, the safety part, a bit more in detail, because I think it's a worrying tendency that we are trying to overemphasize safety that comes at the price of freedom and free speech. So to take an example, in many European Union countries, it's illegal to put out certain types of content. It's illegal to have hate speech. It's illegal to deny the Holocaust, for example, in Germany, which is the right thing to do. But if you're going too much further, and if you're trying to introduce legislation, for example, in the UK, the Online Harms Bill is trying to introduce legislation that would basically create a definition of legal but harmful content. Right. So if I'm mean to you on Twitter, and if I call you nasty names, I promise I will not do that. But if I were to do it, and if I would call you nasty names, basically Twitter would be forced to remove that type of content. But these are automated filters, so they're very imprecise. So it could lead to the stifle of certain types of debates online, and social media companies would be rather hesitant to engage with free speech content simply because they're worried about massive fines. And to put it into perspective, although it's a European Union legislation, the enforcement would be conducted by the members of the European Union. And as you might know, some of the members of the European Union are rather problematic when it comes to liberalism and free speech. So imagine the Hungarian government, member of the EU, basically enforcing some of these rules, and if it dislikes certain types of civil society content, or if it dislikes some of its political opponents, it could use this European Union legislation to campaign against them and remove it from Twitter.
Adam Bartha, Director of the European Policy Information Centre. Really insightful talking to you. Thank you so much for joining me on Channels Business.
Great to be here.
Thank you. Well, sadly, that's all we have time for today, but as always, do get in touch with your comments and suggestions. I'll see you at the same time next week for more in-depth business analysis on Channels Business Global. Goodbye.